Welcome to Introduction to Background Painting. My name is Emily and I'll be your instructor for today. And I'm also the founder of Apples for Artists, which is the organization that is bringing this to you. Our first lesson is going to focus on how we can use values and shapes in our artwork. So, first of all, what is Apples for Artists? We are a fiscally sponsored 501c3 and we aim to make art more accessible and uplift artists worldwide. On our website right now, we have around 30 tutorials that are released for free, and our team consists of 50 artists from 12 states and 15 countries worldwide. Feel free to check out our site at applesforartists.org. Now let's take a look at our course overview. So we're going to have these weekly lessons and they're all going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel so that you can also access them even if you can't come to the Google meetings themselves. We're first going to cover values and shapes in this lesson, which I'm going to teach. Then, in lesson 2, which Jensen is going to teach, you're going to cover color, light, and shadow. Lessons 3 and lesson 4 are both rendering, and they're going to be taught by Shirley and Andy respectively. And lesson 5, you're going to learn how to create atmosphere from Isa. From lessons 1 to 5, we're all going to work on the same reference photo. We're all going to paint that one background. But then, between lessons 5 and lesson 6, there's going to be a 2-week break. And in that break, you're going to take what you learned from lessons 1 to 5 and actually go ahead and implement it in your own piece. So that in lesson 6, we can go and then do a feedback and paint over with multiple instructors of your background. Now let's take a look at the overview of our first lesson. So firstly, we're going to look at what values are, then how we can use them and shapes in backgrounds. Then we're going to do an exercise on blocking in shapes, and then a demonstration where you're going to follow along with us to paint that reference photo in black and white. And then finally, a summary of what we covered so far. First of all, what are values? Value is essentially how light or dark something is. Taking a look at this value scale, we can see the two extremes. On the left, we have very dark values. On the right, we have much lighter values, and we can see the progression from dark to light. Every color will have an underlying value somewhere between white and black. We can see so in this illustration. On the left, we can actually see the different hues that the artist used. The reds, the oranges, and the yellows. But on the right, we can't tell what color there is. We can only see how dark or how light something truly is in the illustration. It's very important that in our backgrounds, we're able to distinguish the forms clearly and understand the story that is being told. Therefore, it's very important to have a high value contrast because then your image or your illustration will be a lot more readable. Let's take a look at an example right here in real illustrations. So, on the left right here, in this illustration, there is a very low value contrast. Everything is just around the same darkness or lightness, and thus, it's really hard to sort of determine what exactly is in this piece. As the viewer, we can sort of make several guesses. Maybe there's these boats here, maybe there is a harbor, but we can't really precisely determine what there actually is due to this very low value contrast. However, on the right painting, it's a lot easier to distinguish what's going on. We have a bed of flowers, we have a hill, we have some buildings because of this high value contrast. The front of the illustration is much darker while the back is much lighter in value, and thus the image is a lot more readable to us as the viewer. It's very important to keep this high contrast and strong values in our painting because even if you are super good at rendering, even if you have strong mastery of technique, if the values are not clear, then the viewer is going to work a lot harder to actually understand what's going on, and it will be a lot harder to distinguish what is actually occurring in the piece. They are what makes our painting feel clearer and more intentional. And we can see so even in film stills. So in these two film stills, there is a very strong contrast in these values, particularly on the right. On the right, the two characters, which are a much darker value, are a lot clearer to see compared to that lighter background. And because of this, we're able to understand what's actually going on in the scene without much work. The story is clear, and our eyes, as the viewer, we know where to look, and we know what to pay attention to because of this high contrast. And when taking a look at these similar film stills, we can also break them down into these main values. So this is a breakdown that I did, around 15 minutes breakdown with this film still. And here, I only used 2 main values. However, even with just these 2 main values and not a lot of detail, because of the clear value structure that I created, then it was very easy for us as the viewer to actually discern what's going on in the scene and in the story itself. And even if we add a third value, this value right here, it doesn't really add much to the meaning of the scene or the meaning of the illustration itself, because right here, with just 2 values and our strong shapes, we're able to discern the forms clearly. And this takes us into the idea of not just having a strong value structure, but also having clear and distinct shapes. So now let's take a look at how we can use different shapes in our backgrounds. Firstly, before we get into any shape language, it's important to break down our background into three main parts: the foreground, the midground, and the background. When we think about a scene, or just something that we want to illustrate, the best approach to do though is actually to immerse yourself in the scene. Pretend that you're actually standing in the scene itself and looking at what's going on, so we can identify these three main parts of the image. So, imagine you're actually standing here in the illustration itself. What would be the part that is closest to you? Then, it would actually be these stairs, and that would be the foreground of the piece, what is closest to us as the viewer. But then, for the midground, what is the second closest? What do our eyes land on? What do we notice first in the piece? What is that bridge between what's in the front and what's in the far back? That is our midground, and here it's these two characters. Finally, we have the background, which is going to be the least detailed and also the most distant. It simply serves as a backdrop and does not contain the main action of the piece. Now, when we think about such groupings, we should also think about grouping elements in terms of their shapes and their value. So, an easy way to do so is the squint test. When we take a look at a scene right here, there are so many details, it can be very hard to focus on what's actually going on. What should I do first? What should I render first? You can either blur the image then, or squint with your eyes, and we can see then that when we blur the image, we can't really see all those little details. All the details are lost, and we can only see the larger forms. We can see this form right here, and then this form, and the back as well, so the foreground, midground, and background, and we can see those larger shapes. The squint test is very helpful because it forces you, as the viewer or as the artist, to deconstruct your illustration. You can't focus and zoom in on all those small details. You must learn the big components of the piece and put them together on the canvas, instead of focusing on just copying the image to 100% accuracy. The squint test goes along with this idea of value massing, or having clear and distinct shapes. So, when we're creating these clear, distinct shapes, we should also group them by their value or their level of lightness or darkness. And we can see this example in this image right here, where we're currently focusing on having just three main shapes that we identified right here with their corresponding three main values. And this is very important to sort of group your values and make sure your shapes are very clear, because if we do not do so, then the read of our composition is essentially lost. As the viewer, we want to understand the story that you're telling in your background, and we want to understand what's actually going on. But it can be very difficult if the values are very cluttered and unclear. Take a look at this illustration right here. We can sort of discern what's going on, but it takes a lot of work as a viewer because there's just so much, and the values are sort of cluttered and not properly grouped. Take a look at this section actually in very great detail. Here, even though we can notice that the artist likely put a lot of detail in it, we can't really tell what exactly is going on because of all these cluttered shapes and cluttered values themselves. In this image, the shapes are very clear and they are very bold, and we can tell what is actually occurring at the first glance. But for this image, it takes a lot more work to just basically understand what's going on in the composition. So, in our compositions, we should block in our elements using clear and bold shapes. Now let's take a look at this exercise, and we can actually block in the values and shapes of the backgrounds. So for those of you on YouTube, you can find the PSD or IPV files in the description. So I'm going to be using IBIS Paint X for this lesson. However, you are free to follow along with your own desired app. Before we actually start painting from a reference, it's very important to actually understand its structure and break it down. The first thing we're going to do is create that new layer on top of everything, and let's label the foreground, midground, and background of this reference. So, once again, imagine if you yourself are actually in that scene. If you're standing here and seeing what's going on right here, what would be the part that would be the closest to you as the viewer? For me, it would be this section right here, this sort of hill right here, and that would be our foreground. The next question to ask ourselves is, what would be our focus? What do our eyes get attracted to? What do we look at first when we look at our image? It would be this midsection right here. That would be considered our midground. And finally, in the far back, with these mountains and the sky, this would be our background. The next thing we're going to do is actually identify the major values in our piece using that squint test. So, when we blur out this reference image in black and white, then we can identify the three major values of it to use in our blocking in and approaching. So, the first thing that stands out to me is this sort of very very dark section. These values are a lot darker than their surroundings themselves. And so I've labeled this one the first value to be aware of. That would be our darkest value. The second thing I notice is these mountains. They're very, very distinct from the sky, and they're a lot darker than the sky is, but they're lighter compared to this dark value that we identified right here. Therefore, we can then say, oh, these mountains and the surrounding hills would have the value number 2, that midtone between the darkest and the lightest value. And so then it would naturally follow that our sky right here, would be the lightest value. And conveniently enough, we've actually put down those 3 main values here so that we can go ahead and block in these shapes with their 3 values. So when we're actually going ahead and creating these shapes, I really recommend that you zoom out your canvas, because then you won't get so obsessed with creating all of these smaller details, and you'll only look at the larger shapes and values of the image. So now, let's create a new layer, plus button, and then clip this layer to the one below, the one labeled paint. In a clipping mask, then you're only going to be able to paint the area that the layer that you're clipped to is able to cover. So in this case, this clipping mask can only clip to this specific area. If I paint, even if I go outside or try to go outside, it won't show on the canvas because of the clipping mask effect. So when we're approaching this values and shapes breakdown, the first thing that I notice, right, going back to our reference picture is, oh, this mountain, this whole shape of the mountain, this is just one big shape right here. This is one big shape in one big form, and we can also notice it right here in this image that consists of our midtone value. And so let's go back to our clipping mask and let's hold down, put your finger or your pen down and hold down on this midtone color. This is going to select that color, and then let's zoom out and let's actually go ahead and draw that outline. Draw that outline of your larger shape. Draw that outline. And of course, do it like so to fill it, because we're going to use the paint bucket tool. So click the bucket and then fill. Now let me just show you quickly why we need to fill in our outlines and we can't leave any gaps. Let's say, for example, that I leave a gap right here, so it's not fully filled. Then when I use the paint bucket, it's not going to fill in the area that I want. Therefore, it's important to maintain that we fill in our gaps so that we can select the area that we want. And I'm just painting in some extra right here. Alright, so now let's create a new layer and as the clipping mask and clip it again. And I'm just gonna go back and break down the bigger shapes, because now what we notice, right? What we notice in the sort of blurry image that we obtained from that squint test, here we have these large strips of this darker value of this darker value right here for these plants. And so then let's go ahead, go back to that clipping mask, the new clipping mask, and select that darker value. Now we can go and we can actually draw in, right, outline the shrubbery. Outline it again for this section, this midsection, and outline it again. Just continue creating your outline, and then go to the bucket tool and fill each of them in. And now we have our broken down version of our reference with just these larger shapes and larger values. And because we're able to create those clearer and stronger shapes, the viewer can understand what's actually going on in the piece, even though we didn't render friendly or add too much detail. Okay, now let's go ahead and we're going to go and work on painting the reference image. So I'm going to go back to my gallery and I'm going to create a new canvas, and it's going to be in the size of a square. So I'm just going to go to the custom and have 3000 by 3000 canvas, so 3000 by 3000 pixels, but you can choose any canvas size you prefer as long as it's in the shape of a square. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and actually import my reference image. So to do so, click this icon, the layers icon, click the camera icon, import photo library, and then go ahead and import your reference image. And for those of you in YouTube, the reference image is also going to be included in the description link as well. So, and let's drag it to this left corner. Now, we're going to duplicate the layer with that reference image. So, click this, then duplicate layer. Let's click and create a new layer, and clip it to the duplicated layer. Take your brush and fill that image completely with black. And then go to your layer modes and select color. This is going to turn your image into a black and white image. And then we can go ahead and merge that clipping mask down to our layer. And we can use our transform tool and just drag our image to the right. With this image, we're going to then duplicate it once and move it down here. I know there's a lot of duplicating and just redoing, but this is because we want to break down the reference image. And we're going to go to our filter, go to Gaussian blur, and blur the image very strongly so that we can replicate the idea of the squint test and ensure that we can only see the bigger shapes and forms. Let's go back to our grayscale layer that is not blurred. Let's duplicate it again. And go and drag it down here. And we're going to go back to the blur tool, but we're going to blur it just a little less so we can sort of discern the larger shapes a lot easier. Finally, we're going to go ahead and duplicate our reference image and take the transformed and move it down here. Alright, now I know that there is a lot of images here to break down, and each of them actually serve a different purpose. So let's make a layer on top of absolutely everything. And we're going to start with the image on the bottom right. Because before we go ahead and focus on breaking down these values, these shapes, we should understand what are the main forms in the piece that we need to pay attention to. Alright, let's think about it again. Let's imagine you're here. You are actually in the scene and you're looking at it. Now the question is, what is the thing that is closest to you as the viewer in the scene? For me, it would be this sort of bit of grass and shrubbery right here. Number 1. Now, what is the part of the image that is the second closest? It would actually be this bit of greenery in the water, because if you can sort of tell, the water actually extends further than this, than the greenery. So the water would be number 3. Then, looking further, number 4 would be this long stretch of forest or just these long stretch of trees. Behind this forest is this large stretch of a mountain, and then behind that mountain is yet another mountain, number 6, and then finally we have the sky. So we have 7 main components. Alright, let's actually go back and look at the super blurry image. So our goal, or our objective with this super blurry image actually is to identify these 3 main values. We want to identify the midtone, the dark value, and the light value. So let's just write here 3 main values. When I look at this, right, what really stands out to me is this stretch right here and this stretch right here. Both of these sections have much darker values. And so here we can identify that dark value. But then look at the river and look at the mountains, right? They sort of have this midtone. And then we can sort of see these small pockets here in the river, here in the mountains. These places, here in the sky, these places have much lighter values. So we've identified our midtone, our dark value, and our light value. And we can go again and select and hold down with our pen or your finger and select with the eyedropper tool the dark values, that midtone, and then the light value. So we have our 3 main values. But those are just the 3 main values of the piece, and we can actually notice that in the environment itself, there are 4 more of these details and intricate things that we should be aware of. For example, on the mountain, we see there are these ridges. Ridges here, here, and here. Then on this mountain, we see there is so much vegetation. This huge amount of vegetation that, of course, we can label them 1, 2. And then for our water, we have these huge shadows. And under here too, that are reflected by our plants, and there are shadows on the plants themselves, as well as reflections from the mountain. So we actually have several additional values that we can take account to of these details and lights and shadow. The three additional values. And then we can go again, take our pen, select that dark value, then select that sort of mid-tone, and then select the lighter value that we often notice in those mountains. So now we have our 3 main values and our 3 additional values. Now, what do we do with this breakdown? We're going to save it to our camera roll. So in IBIS Paint X, to do so, click the arrow, then save image. So let's go back to our gallery and let's create a custom canvas. So I'm going to use 4,000 pixels in the width and 3,000 pixels in the height. Now let's open our reference window. To do so, click the arrow, go to settings, then at user interface, select reference window, and turn that option on. Click the camera icon, and we can then import a reference from our camera roll and select that breakdown that we just did. And now we have this as a guide to approach our illustration. First of all, right here we broke it down to 7 main components of our artwork. And so in our layers, let's create 7 different layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're going to start on the topmost layer, which is where the items in the utmost front are. So on the layers above, the items or the elements in your piece that are in the front will exist. While as we go back, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, on layer 1, the elements in your piece that are the farthest away will exist. Therefore, on layer 7, we're actually going to have the element labeled number 1 here, and on layer 1, we're actually going to have the sky in the piece. Now, let's actually go ahead and draw out these forms with our 3 main values. First, let's start with form number 1, which is the sort of bit of shrubbery in the front. Let's select the darkest value, and we're going to do what we just did in our exercise of breaking down those reference images. We're going to take our brush, and here I'm going to be using the Felt Tip Pen Hard, which is basically the hard round brush with no pressure opacity. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sort of outline that form, outlining it on the canvas, and then go in with the bucket tool and fill. Now we're going to do the same on the second layer, or the layer that contains the elements that are second least farthest away. And we're going to now draw out this bit of shrubbery in the front. Draw that outline, just like so. And fill it in with our bucket tool. The next thing we're going to do is draw in that body of water. So let's go to layer 5, and we're going to select now. We can see here that the water is actually in the mid-tone. So select the mid-tone value. We can go ahead and draw in the water. So I'm just outlining it right here. Fill it in with our paint bucket tool. Now, let's go to layer 4, which is where the large amount of trees and forest or shrubbery is. And go ahead, once again, see it's a process of rinsing and repeating. Just carve out that larger shape of the plants in the shrubbery. Fill it in with our bucket tool. And feel free to go and brush in or draw in whatever that you feel is sufficient. If the first try isn't what you desire, now go down to layer 3, which is where the first set of mountains will be. And once again, we just draw out that outline, draw out that distinct large shape. And fill in it with our bucket tool, and do the same for the mountain behind it. Since I want this mountain to be sort of sharper, I'm going to use my eraser and use long strokes like this, long and fast strokes, in order to make the edges of the mountain or the shape of the mountain a lot sharper and look more mountain-like. And finally, we have the sky, which is of the lightest value, and thus we can go ahead and fill it in with our bucket tool. Okay, now we sort of have an idea what's going on, but it's still important to add more detail and more discernment. So, what's the next move? We're going to go ahead and actually add the shadows or the greater detail in our pieces. Let's go back to the topmost layer, create clipping mask, and clip it, and we can see here these larger shadows on these plants we can create. So we can outline them again and fill them in with our bucket tool. Right here as well, so outline or just paint them in yourself. We can now do the same for this bit of a shrubbery, and here we can just go ahead and paint in the shadow. Once again, don't worry about small and intricate details. We need to focus on these larger and broader shapes. Now let's go to the water layer. So what we notice in the water layer, firstly, the mountains actually have a reflection on the water. Let's go ahead and we can go outline that reflection and fill it with our bucket tool. But another thing, these plants or these forests also leave reflections on the water. And in this case, they leave very sharp and strong reflection. So what I'm actually going to use is the lasso tool, and I'm going to use the add version of the lasso tool so that I can just add what I want to carve out. And we can just add and paint in that shadow of the plants. And we can do the same for this bit. Create these larger and sharper shapes with our lasso tool. Once you're satisfied with the shapes that you sort of carved out, then go to your brush and you can color those shapes in. And as you can see here, the only parts that are influenced are what you actually carve out with the lasso tool. Then you can go ahead and feel free to change it further. So here you can see I'm manually sort of drawing in those shadows just a little more and then making them sharper by using my eraser. Just going ahead and doing that. Now let's go ahead and draw in that shadow for this bit of greenery in the back, and we can now go ahead and go back with that outline, outlining that, and then fill it in with our bucket tool. And you can also go ahead with your eraser if when you outlined wasn't what you expected, or if you have any changes that you want to make. So that's what I'm doing right now, just adding in some more and adjusting. So going between the brush and eraser to create the shape and form that I want. Now, let's look at these mountains. So right now we can't really tell what's what because the values of the mountains, or at least the base values, are very similar. But if we look and we notice, in the front mountain, there are these larger shapes, or there are these larger areas where there are sort of these smaller plants of a much darker value. So then let's actually go in and select that color that we found and outline in those plants. We're going to go ahead and do that. And we can also see on this side, there is a huge form as well. So we can go ahead and also outline that and fill it. And now, just with this step, we're able to discern between our larger mountain in the back and this mountain that is much closer to us as the viewer. Now, last but not least, we have this mountain in the far back, and we can see that on this mountain, there are some very clear planes, there are some very clear edges and ridges that we want to convey in our piece. So let's take this value that we just identified from our breakdown here, and we can go ahead and use our lasso tool to create that outline. So we're going to go ahead and just try that out and then color it in precisely. Or if you're not very comfortable with the lasso tool, you can of course just manually draw the shape that you want in and then sort of clean it up and get that sharp edge with your eraser. I recommend using the lasso tool because it can allow you to obtain those sharp edges a lot easier. So see here, I'm using the paint bucket and outline method, but I have to go back with my eraser in order to make sure that everything is very clear. You can see also On this side, there are also some very strong, sharp edges. So I'm going in and painting them in. I'm partially using the lasso tool and partially using the paint bucket tool. Even if you use the lasso tool, you may have the desire to still correct and create those hard edges as well. The more that you use the lasso tool, and the more mastery you have of it, you'll find that it's a lot easier to use than just painting directly. For instance, when I want to create a sharp edge, I can do so with ease instead of going in and doing so much editing to it after using the paint bucket tool. And on this side, we can also see several ridges, which are much easier. Just go ahead and draw in with our lasso tool and then fill in with our brush. Now we have a pretty good base and we now understand what's actually going on in our image, but this can still be improved because right now in the parts with the foliage and the greenery, it's sort of difficult to actually identify them as parts with trees and with bushes and such. We're going to add just a little bit of texture with a sharp brush. So on IBIS Paint X, the brush I'm going to use is the Dip Pen Hard brush, which is default. Any brush that has this type of effect with a sort of sharp shape and no pressure opacity is ideal. Let's go to the topmost layer, or number 1, labeled here, and let's actually go select the color, that base color that we want, that dark value from the 3 main values, right? And select that brush, and we're going to go in, and we're going to use our brush and create this type of motion. Just upward, upward, upward. You can also vary the motions upward, left, right, because then, as you can see, with these left strokes, we can sort of tell, oh, this is grass. This is the texture of grass. This is the texture of plants. So now let's go back to the layer and select that and go and do that same motion of the grass. Go ahead, add a few strokes just like so, a few varying strokes all around this form. You don't have to add it in every single place, just enough so that our viewer is aware, oh hey, this right here, it's not just a random lump, it's actually the plants used in our piece. You can see I'm continuing to just go ahead and add those small textures, try to balance it out. We can actually go ahead and do the same for our shadow. Select that shadow color and do the same motion with our brush to give that illusion, to give the idea that, hey, this right here, this form right here is actually plants. We're actually dealing with plants in the piece and not just a random form. What I also like to do is use my eraser and actually go ahead and erase out the shadow so we can sort of see, sort of with negative space, that this is grass as well. I'm just going ahead and adjusting the shape. And we can apply the same concept to the bits of shrubbery here as well. So let's select that base color, that darkest value, and just with a few brush strokes, add just a little variety back and forth like so that the viewer knows, oh hey, this is actually a plant. This is a group of plants, in fact. This isn't just some random form in the middle of our piece. And we can do the same with the shadow. So select that shadow color, just add a little variation in brushstroke in order to help us as the viewer identify, hey, that's the shadow of those plants. We can also add some variety for the sort of lines of trees in the back. So I'm going to use a different color just to show what I'm going to do. But we can sort of build the idea or build the form by adding a variety of textures like this and building the idea like, hey, this is actually, these are trees. These aren't just random blobs in the back. By creating the illusion of detail and just adding those small bits of texture to your base layer. So let's go back ahead and do the same. Go, and I'm just gonna add a bit of variety in the texture. And make sure to keep your canvas zoomed out during this time so you know like what else to add and what to remove. Go to the shadow layer, and we can also do a little bit of the same. So go ahead, just sort of dot in that texture that you want. There we go. Now there is a lot more variation, and we can sort of identify the forms much clearer. I'm also erasing some of the shadow just to give a better idea that there are these trees and these plants that exist here. So now, as the viewer, we can actually say, oh, the scene has mountains, the scene has water, the scene has lots of plants and lots of greenery. And this doesn't come from having any color or any very fancy rendering. In fact, this is achieved by simply just looking at these broader shapes and forms, because using these recognizable forms and these very sharp shapes, we can actually communicate the idea of the painting and the idea of the story to our viewer. Now there's one last step that we can do. Let's take a new layer on top of the sky layer, clip it, and then go to any airbrush that you want. Select a brighter or a lighter gray and just sort of go in this upward motion, brush up. I'm gonna take an even lighter gray for emphasis and brush up behind. Sort of create this atmosphere. And so now we have a great base that we can use to go from grayscale to color. Alright, so here is a summary of what we covered today. So firstly, value is how light or dark something is, and each color is going to have its own underlying value. For our art or our image to be very readable, we have to have a high value contrast. Each scene is going to be composed of the foreground, midground, and background, and when you're immersing yourself in the scene, the farther something is, the less detailed it will be. It's very important to break such scenes in larger shapes and strong values to allow for the strong read of the composition and easy understanding, and you should use 3 main values: a light value, a mid-tone, and a dark value, and then go ahead and build up that detail from there. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, all these slides will be sent through email, and for those of you in YouTube, they're going to be included in the description. And all the lessons, of course, will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Feel free to contact us for any questions at our email or our Insta. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something new and that you have an amazing day.